My father was a respected pillar of the community, a man who could charm anyone. To me, he was a monster who spent my entire life gaslighting me and manipulating my family. When his multi-million-dollar real estate empire came crashing down, he tried to make me the fall guy, framing me for a massive financial crime investigation that could have sent me to prison for decades. He thought I was still the scared little boy he'd always controlled. He was wrong. This is the story of how I untangled his web of lies, discovered the secret my mother had been hiding for years, and orchestrated a revenge so complete it destroyed everything he had ever built. This is a story about betrayal, narcissistic abuse, and the moment a victim becomes the victor. This is the story of how I took back my life. If you enjoyed this video or found it helpful, go ahead and give it a like. It really helps me out. And if you haven't already, hit that subscribe button so you don't miss any future videos. Thanks a bunch! The knock on the door came on a Tuesday. Tuesdays in Austin are supposed to be innocuous. They're the day of the week you forget, sandwiched between the lingering dread of Monday and the first hint of Friday's promise. I was working from my small apartment in a quiet suburb just south of the river, the kind of place with a sensible succulent on the windowsill and a half-empty bag of artisanal coffee on the counter. I was 26 years old, a data analyst for a mid-sized tech company, and I'd curated a life of meticulous, deliberate quiet. It was a quiet I'd fought for, a quiet I'd earned. The knock wasn't loud, but it had a certain percussive authority that made the hairs on my arms stand up. It wasn't a neighbor asking for a cup of sugar or a delivery driver dropping off a package. This was a knock with intent. I looked through the peephole. A man in a cheap, rumpled suit stood on my welcome mat, his expression a perfect mask of bored officialdom. I opened the door a crack, my hand still on the knob. "Ethan Hayes," he asked. Not really a question. He didn't say anything else. He just handed me a thick manila envelope and turned to walk away. I stood there for a moment, the envelope feeling impossibly heavy in my hand, as if it were filled with lead instead of paper. I closed the door, my heart starting a frantic, uneven rhythm against my ribs. I knew with the kind of primal certainty that bypasses all rational thought that this was from him, that my carefully constructed peace was about to be shattered. My father, Richard Hayes, was not a man who sent letters. He was a man who summoned people. He was a titan of Austin real estate, a self-made millionaire whose face was plastered on billboards along I-35, his smile a blinding, predatory white. He was a philanthropist, a regular on the society pages, a man who shook hands with the mayor and donated wings to hospitals. To the world, he was a pillar of the community. To me, he was the architect of my own personal hell. I sat down at my small dining table, my hands trembling slightly as I tore open the envelope. The document inside was dense with legalese, a forest of intimidating words, but a few phrases leaped out at me like flames in the dark. Federal grand jury subpoena. Investigation into wire fraud, mail fraud, and money laundering. Hayes Development Group. Ethan Hayes as a principal officer of... My breath caught in my throat. I read the list of shell corporations named in the subpoena. Hill Country Holdings, LLC, Barton Creek Ventures, Inc., Longhorn Capital Management. Names I vaguely recognized. Names I hadn't thought about in years. I was a principal officer. It wasn't a request. It was a statement of fact. My mind reeled back 8 years, to another Tuesday. I was 18, sitting in my father's cavernous home office in Westlake Hills. The room smelled of expensive leather and his signature Tom Ford cologne, a scent that to this day makes my stomach clench. He sat behind a desk the size of a small car, a portrait of success and power. I sat opposite him, a gangly, nervous teenager, desperate for a crumb of his approval. "Ethan," he'd said, his voice a smooth, deep baritone that could soothe investors and terrify his family in equal measure. "We need to talk about your future." This was his favorite topic. My future as designed and curated by him. He'd already mapped it out, a business degree from UT, an internship at his company, and an eventual ascension to his right hand. My own quiet desires, a love for history, a knack for computers, were dismissed as hobbies. "You're a man now," he continued, leaning forward. "And a man needs to build his own wealth. I've been thinking, I want to set you up, give you a head start." My heart, the foolish, hopeful heart of an 18-year-old, fluttered. A head start. Maybe this was it. Maybe this was the moment he would finally see me, not as a disappointment or a project, but as a son. He slid a thick stack of documents across the polished mahogany. TIS is a series of holding companies. A trust, essentially. It's a way to move some assets around, minimize our tax burden. It's all perfectly legal, just smart business. I'm going to make you an officer. It's just a title, a formality. But on paper, it'll look like you've been in the game for years. It'll build your portfolio before you even finish college. I looked at the documents. They were incomprehensible, a blur of corporate jargon, articles of incorporation, operating agreements. My name was typed neatly on signature lines everywhere. Dad, I don't understand any of this, I'd stammered. He smiled, a patient, condescending smile he reserved for when I was being particularly slow. And you don't have to, son. That's what I'm here for. I handle the complicated stuff. You just need to trust me. This is for you. This is all for you. Trust me. It was his favorite refrain, the cornerstone of his manipulation. To question him was to be ungrateful. To hesitate was to be disloyal. Growing up in his house was like living in a psychological funhouse where all the mirrors were warped. My memories, my feelings, my own perception of reality, they were constantly called into question. I remembered being 12 and finding a woman's earring, a small, gaudy rhinestone thing, in his car. It wasn't my mother's. My mother, Sarah, was a woman of quiet, classic tastes. When I asked him about it, my voice small and trembling, he didn't get angry. He got calm. He knelt down in front of me, his eyes boring into mine. Ethan, he said, his voice soft and laced with disappointment. And why would you make something like that up? You know how vivid your imagination is. You've been reading too many of those fantasy books. There's no earring. You're just trying to get attention. She made me go and look again. Of course, it was gone. I spent the next week convinced I was losing my mind, that I had hallucinated the entire thing. It was a masterful stroke of gaslighting. He didn't just deny the evidence, he made the accusation a symptom of my own flawed character. I learned to stop trusting my own eyes. My mother was his silent, tragic accomplice. She wasn't cruel, not like him. She was erased. A ghost in her own home. She moved through the sprawling mansion with a practiced quiet, her smiles fragile, her eyes perpetually clouded with a sorrow I couldn't name. She saw what he did, I know she did. I would catch her watching us, a flicker of pain in her expression, before it was smoothed over with a mask of placid neutrality. She was trapped in a state of learned helplessness, so deeply enmeshed in his world that she couldn't see a way out. Her codependency was the air she breathed. Once, when I was 15, he had promised to come to my debate tournament finals. It was the most important event of my high school career. He'd made a big show of it, telling me how proud he was, how he'd cleared his entire schedule. I stood on that stage, my heart pounding, scanning the audience for his face. He never showed up. When I got home, my disappointment a bitter taste in my mouth. I found him on the patio, laughing on the phone with an investor. When I confronted him, my voice thick with unshed tears, he looked at me with genuine confusion. The debate? Ethan, that was next Thursday. You've got your dates mixed up again. You really need to be more organized. He said it with such conviction that for a split second, I believed him. I actually pulled out the school calendar to check, my hands shaking. The date was correct. It was today. When I showed him, he just shrugged. Well, the office must have put it in my calendar wrong. These things happen. Don't be so dramatic about it. There was no apology. No acknowledgement of my hurt. The blame was deflected, my feelings invalidated, and the incident dismissed. My mother, who had heard the whole exchange, just quietly refilled his glass of iced tea, her hand trembling almost imperceptibly. "Don't upset your father, Ethan," she whispered to me later, as if his emotional comfort was the most important thing in the universe. So, at 18, sitting in that office, what choice did I have? I was conditioned to believe that my own judgment was faulty, that his wisdom was absolute. The cognitive dissonance was deafening. The man who claimed to love me was the source of my deepest pain. To resolve it, I had to believe in one version of him. I chose to believe in the benevolent father. I signed the papers. Every single one. I scrawled my name where he pointed. My signature a testament to my own subjugation. "There," he'd said, clapping me on the shoulder, the gesture feeling more like a brand than a sign of affection. "That's my boy, the first day of the rest of your life." Now, sitting in my quiet Austin apartment, the subpoena in my hand, I realized he was right. It was the first day of the rest of my life, the day the bill for my youthful gullibility came due. He had built a cage for me 8 years ago, and I had willingly walked into it. Now, the door had slammed shut, and the federal government was rattling the bars. He hadn't just given me a head start, he had made me his scapegoat. He had woven my name into the very fabric of his criminal enterprise, and now that it was unraveling, he was going to let me burn with it. For a long time, I just sat there, the silence of the apartment pressing in on me. The carefully constructed quiet I was so proud of now felt like the silence of a tomb. Every part of me wanted to crumble, to revert to that scared little boy who just wanted his dad's approval. The learned helplessness was a powerful tide, pulling me under. It's too big, you can't fight this, you can't fight him. But then, something else stirred within me, a flicker of rage. It wasn't the hot, impotent anger of my youth. This was cold. It was a slow-burning, diamond-hard fury. He had gaslit me, manipulated me, and erased my reality for 26 years. He had used my mother's fear to control us both, and now he was going to sacrifice me to save himself. He had made one critical miscalculation. He still saw me as that 18-year-old kid. He didn't know the man I had become in the quiet spaces where he couldn't reach me. The man who had found a home in the cold, hard logic of data. The man who could see patterns in chaos. My father had built his empire on lies, on shifting stories and manipulated emotions. My world was built on facts, ones and zeros, things that were either true or false. I stood up, the subpoena clutched in my hand. The fear was still there, a cold knot in my stomach, but the rage was a fire warming my veins. He had started a war, assuming I was an unarmed civilian. He was about to find out I had spent the last 8 years forging my own weapons. My first call wasn't to him. It wasn't to my mother. My first call was to a name I'd gotten from a colleague a year ago, filed away for a rainy day. I had a feeling the storm had just arrived. Jessica Martinez, attorney at law, a crisp, no-nonsense voice answered on the second ring. "My name is Ethan Hayes," I said, my own voice steadier than I expected. I think I'm in a lot of trouble, and I need to hire you to help me with a financial crime investigation." There was a pause on the other end. "Hayes?" she said, a note of interest in her voice. "Us in Hayes Development?" "Yes," I said. "My father is Richard Hayes, and I think he just tried to ruin my life." Jessica Martinez operated out of a sleek, modern office downtown, with floor-to-ceiling windows that looked out over the Austin skyline. The view was a panorama of my father's influence, gleaming office towers and luxury condo buildings that bore his company's logo. Jessica herself was the opposite of the opulent world outside. She was sharp, angular, and dressed in a minimalist black suit. Her office was Spartan, functional. There were no family photos, no decorative clutter, just a powerful computer, a few law books, and an aura of intense, focused competence. I sat across from her desk, the subpoena lying between us like a dead thing. I had spent 48 hours in a state of suspended animation, barely eating, barely sleeping, just replaying every interaction with my father, every lie, every moment of manipulation. I told her everything. I started with the day I signed the papers and went all the way back to the non-existent earring. I told her about his charm, his rages, the psychological maze he'd constructed for our family. I expected skepticism, or worse, pity. I got neither. She listened intently, her fingers steepled, her eyes never leaving my face. She didn't interrupt. When I finally finished, my voice hoarse, she was silent for a long moment. "He's a classic narcissist," she said, not as a diagnosis, but as a statement of operational fact. A textbook case. Grandiose sense of self-importance, a need for excessive admiration, a lack of empathy, and a history of exploiting others to achieve his own ends. "And John Marcia Hayes, you were an asset. And oh, God. And now, you're a liability he's trying to liquidate." Hearing it laid out so clinically was both chilling and profoundly validating. For the first time, someone was describing the monster in my head in clear, unambiguous terms. "And so what happens now?" I asked. "Now we fight," she said, her voice devoid of sentimentality. "The U.S. Attorney's Office doesn't send out subpoenas like this for fun. They have evidence. They've been building a case, probably for years. Right now they see your name on a dozen shell corporations that were likely used to launder money or hide assets in a Ponzi-style real estate scheme. They see you as a willing participant. I wasn't, I insisted. I didn't know what I was signing. Senator Maybank tried. I believe you, she said. But a jury won't. I didn't know is not a legal defense, especially when your signature is on everything. Our job is to prove you were a pawn, not a player. We need to prove you had no knowledge, no intent, and received no benefit from these crimes. We need to find the real criminal and serve him up to the feds on a silver platter. She leaned forward, her gaze sharp. Tell me about the benefit. Did you ever receive any money from these companies? Large, unexplained deposits in your bank account? A car? Did he pay your college tuition directly from one of these LCC? I shook my head. No. My tuition was paid from his personal account. He always made a big deal of it. He gave me an allowance, but it was the same amount he'd given me in high school. He liked keeping me on a short leash financially. It was about control. Good, she nodded. That's a start. No direct benefit is a strong point in our favor. Now for the hard part, knowledge and intent. We need to find evidence that you were actively deceived. Emails, letters, recordings. Anything where he tells you this was a trust or a formality. My heart sank. And Dad doesn't do emails for important things. He talks, on the phone or in person. He knows emails leave a trail. Of course he does, Jessica said with a sigh. Okay. We'll subpoena his phone records, his calendars. We'll build a circumstantial case. But what I really need is a smoking gun. Something that proves he knew exactly what he was doing and intentionally misled you. Hayes, Ethan. This is going to be the fight of your life. He will come after you. He will try to discredit you, intimidate you, and manipulate you. He will use every tool in his arsenal. Are you ready for that? I thought of my mother's haunted eyes. I thought of the years of self-doubt and confusion. I thought of the cold fury that had been smoldering inside me. I'm ready, I said. The first salvo from my father came 3 days later. It wasn't a call from him. It was from my mother. Her voice on the phone was thin and strained, stretched taut over a bedrock of panic. Ethan? Your father is worried sick about you, she began, launching directly into the scripted words he had undoubtedly fed her. He heard you hired a lawyer, a criminal lawyer. What on earth is going on? You're scaring us. Mom, I said, trying to keep my voice even. And Dad is being investigated by the federal government. And he put my name on everything. He framed me. There was a choked sound on her end. No, she whispered. The denial automatic. He would never. He told me you were getting overwhelmed with your job, that you were stressed, not thinking clearly. He said you were making wild accusations, gaslighting, a step removed. He was using her as his proxy. Mom, listen to me. He's lying to you. He's been lying to both of us for years. I have a federal subpoena in my hand. This is real. You need to stop this, Ethan, she pleaded, her voice rising in desperation. And talk to your father. And talk to your father. He can fix this. He can always fix things. You're going to destroy this family. A trauma bond was a chain around her heart. She was defending her own captor. He wasn't the source of the problem. I was, for daring to name it. There is no family to destroy, Mom, I said, the words tasting like acid. She destroyed it a long time ago. I have to go. I hung up before she could reply, my hand shaking. It hurt. It hurt more than I could have imagined. But Jessica's words echoed in my head. He will use every tool in his arsenal. My mother was his most effective tool. I threw myself into the work Jessica had given me. She'd had me create a complete financial history of my life since I was 18. Bank statements, tax returns, credit card bills. I dug through years of digital archives, my data analysis skills finally being put to personal use. I created spreadsheets, charts, data visualizations. It was a portrait of a normal middle-class existence. A student loan I was paying off, a modest car payment, rent, groceries. There were no million-dollar deposits, no lavish expenditures. There was nothing that pointed to a man benefiting from a massive fraud. As I worked, I felt a shift in my own mind. The boy who doubted his own memory was being replaced by a man who trusted data. The data didn't lie. The data wasn't emotional. It was a rock of certainty in a sea of my father's lies. I was beginning to form a boundary, not of words but of facts. I was building a fortress of proof around my own sanity. A week into my deep dive, I found it. It was an anomaly, a single data point that didn't fit. A wire transfer from my personal savings account dated 6 years ago for $50,000. The recipient was an LLC I'd never heard of, Azure Sky Properties. I never made that transfer. I'd never had $50,000 in my savings account in my life. I stared at the screen, my blood running cold. How was that possible? I pulled up the detailed statement from the bank's archives. A deposit for $50,000 from Longhorn Capital Management, one of the shell companies, on a Monday. The transfer out to Azure Sky Properties was on Tuesday. The money was in my account for less than 24 hours. It was a classic money laundering technique, using my account as a temporary pass-through to make the funds seem clean. But how? How did he do it without my knowledge? I never gave him my online banking passwords. I never, and then I remembered. I was 20. I was home from college for the summer. I'd gotten a new laptop and I was setting it up in the living room. My father came in, sat beside me on the couch, and started asking about online security. "It's amazing what they can do now, isn't it?" he'd said, watching me type. "So I should probably get one of these password manager things. I'm always forgetting mine." He'd asked me to show him how mine worked. He watched over my shoulder as I logged into my bank, my email, my school portal. I, eager to show off my tech savviness to him, had explained it all. He must have seen my passwords. He must have memorized them or written them down. He had violated my personal, private digital space, and I hadn't even realized it. The memory was so insignificant at the time, but now it felt like a home invasion. I immediately started digging into Azure Sky Properties. It didn't take long. It was a Delaware corporation, which made it hard to trace ownership. But the registration documents listed a mailing address. It was a P.O. box in a small town in the Texas Hill Country. On a hunch, I started searching for other connections to that town, property records, business filings, and then I found a name, cross-referenced with my father's old company phone directories. A woman. A former executive assistant who had retired, abruptly about 10 years ago. The real bombshell came when I searched her name on social media. Her profile was private, but her daughter's wasn't. I scrolled through years of photos. Family vacations, birthdays. And there, in a photo from 6 years ago, was a picture of the mother standing in front of a brand new luxury SUV, a huge red bow on the hood. The caption read, "Mom's early retirement present finally came in. So proud of her hard work paying off." The price of that specific model of SUV, brand new 6 years ago, just over $50,000. It was a payoff. Hush money. My father had used my bank account to launder a bribe to one of his former employees. He had made me an active, albeit unknowing, participant in the obstruction of justice. I leaned back in my chair, the pieces clicking into place with a horrifying certainty. This was it. This was the kind of evidence Jessica had been talking about. It wasn't just about my name on a document. This was a specific, traceable criminal act that he had funneled through my life. But as I sat there, a different, colder thought began to form. This was just one transaction, one woman. My father's empire was worth hundreds of millions of dollars. The fraud the feds were investigating had to be vast. This was just a single thread. Where did the rest of the threads lead? My father was meticulous. He was arrogant, but not stupid. He wouldn't have left an easy trail. I had looked through his digital life, what I could access, and it was clean. Too clean. It was like he knew someone would one day come looking, and that's when I thought about my mother. My mother, Sarah Hayes, had passed away 2 years ago. The official cause of death was a heart attack. The doctors had called it a consequence of chronic stress. At the time, I had accepted it. She had always been a fragile, anxious person. Living with my father was like living in a constant low-grade earthquake. Of course, her heart had given out. After she died, my father had made a great show of grieving. He'd had her office, her sanctuary in the house, cleared out and redecorated within a month. He'd said it was too painful to see her things. I had been given a few boxes of her belongings, photo albums, some of her favorite books, old jewelry. They were sitting in the back of my closet, relics of a life I could barely remember. I had never looked through them closely, it was too painful, but now, I pulled the boxes out, dust motes dancing in the afternoon light. I opened the first one. It was full of photo albums, the old-fashioned kind with sticky pages and plastic film. My mother had been a meticulous documentarian of our family life, or at least, the glossy, presentable version of it. Birthday parties, family vacations to Hawaii, my high school graduation. In every photo, my father was front and center, beaming. My mother was usually just at the edge of the frame, her smile a little too tight. I flipped through the pages, a wave of grief and nostalgia washing over me. And then I saw it. Tucked into the back of an album from my childhood was a small, folded piece of paper. It was a list of dates, and next to each date, a series of seemingly random letters and numbers. It looked like gibberish. My heart started to pound. This was her handwriting. I recognized the elegant looping script. Why would she hide this? I pulled out my laptop, my mind racing. What if it wasn't gibberish? What if it was a code? My mother wasn't a tech person, but she was smart. She loved crossword puzzles and ciphers. It was her quiet little hobby. The first line read, 4118, HCDG 881 Acheron, HCDG, Hayes Corp, Development Group, maybe. What about Acheron? An anagram? An old password? I tried dozens of combinations, getting nowhere. I felt a surge of frustration. This was insane. I was chasing ghosts. I put the list down and started going through the other boxes. I found her old laptop, a dated machine she'd used for emails and browsing. My father had given it to me, saying it was probably junk. I'd never even turned it on. Now, I plugged it in, and to my surprise, it booted up. It was slow, ancient by tech standards. Her desktop was clean, just a few folders, recipes, garden club, Monday book club notes, and in one folder, innocuously labeled photos. I clicked on it. It was full of the same family pictures from the albums. Hundreds of them. But I wasn't looking at the pictures. I was a data analyst. I was looking at the metadata. I opened the properties of the first image, date created, date modified, camera type, standard stuff. I went to the next one, and the next. Then, on a photo of me as a 10-year-old on a fishing trip, I found it. Hidden in the comments section of the file's metadata, a field most people don't even know exists, was a short string of text. Acheron Bluebonnet Savings and Loan. My breath hitched. I scrambled back to the list. A118, HCDG, 881 Acheron. Bluebonnet Savings and Loan. A small regional bank that had gone bust during the 2008 financial crisis. My father had been a major investor. The news at the time said he'd lost a fortune. He'd made a big public show of his devastating losses, using it to gain sympathy and political capital. What if he hadn't lost anything? What if HCDG 881 was an account number? What if, on April 11, 2008, he had moved his money out, right before the collapse, using inside information? My mother. My quiet, erased, ghost-like mother. She wasn't just a victim, she was a witness. She had been watching, listening, and secretly documenting everything. She couldn't confront him. She couldn't escape him. But she could leave a trail. She could leave a weapon for the one person she thought might one day be strong enough to use it. She had left me a treasure map, written in the secret language of her pain, and I was the only one who could read it. The investigation was no longer just about saving myself. It was about avenging her. The discovery of my mother's coded messages changed everything. It was like finding a key to a locked room I never knew existed. The grief I felt for her transformed into a profound, aching respect. She hadn't been a passive casualty of my father's tyranny. She had been a covert operative in her own home, a quiet resistor gathering intelligence from behind enemy lines. Her helplessness had been a mask, a form of camouflage that allowed her to move undetected through his world. I took the list and the laptop to Jessica. We sat in her conference room, the city lights beginning to twinkle outside as dusk settled over Austin. I showed her the metadata, the list, my theory about Bluebonnet Savings and Loan. Her usual stoic composure cracked. She stared at the screen, a look of astonishment on her face. "My God, Ethan," she breathed. This is a ledger, a secret ledger of his crimes hidden in plain sight. Your mother was brilliant." For the next 2 weeks, that conference room became our war room. We worked relentlessly, fueled by coffee and a shared, burning sense of purpose. It was a painstaking process of digital archaeology. Each line on my mother's list was a puzzle. A photo's metadata would give us the name of a bank or a person, which was the key to unlocking the meaning of the cryptic string of letters and numbers. 72210, Gur V45 Jericho. The metadata in a photo of a family barbecue pointed to a contact in my mother's old address book, Jericho Consulting, with a phone number. Jessica's private investigator traced the defunct consulting firm to one of my father's former business partners, a man who had been mysteriously forced out of the company in 2010. The numbers, we hypothesized, were an offshore account in the Cayman Islands. 11513, LCM 901 Canary. This one was chilling. The corresponding photo was one of the last pictures ever taken of my mother's closest friend, a woman who had died suddenly of an aneurysm a few months after the picture was taken. Her husband had worked as a city planning commissioner. Canary, we figured, was a reference to a canary in a coal mine. A warning. We found records of a resonating vote that had happened on January 15, 2013. A vote that had netted Hayes Development hundreds of millions of dollars on a new downtown skyscraper project. LCM 901 was likely a payoff, funneled through Longhorn Capital Management, the shell company I was supposedly an officer of. The implication was sickening. The commissioner's silence had been bought, and the one person who might have known, my mother's friend, was gone. With every secret we unearthed, a clearer picture of my father emerged. He wasn't just a fraud. He was a predator of the highest order, leaving a trail of ruined lives and broken people in his wake. And all along, my mother had been watching, taking notes, creating an unshakable record of his sins. She knew she couldn't bring him down herself, but she had armed me for the battle she knew was coming. While Jessica and her team worked on building the legal framework, my job was to continue the data decryption and, more importantly, to play my part. On Jessica's advice, I had to maintain a facade of crumbling weakness. My father needed to believe his campaign of intimidation was working. He escalated his attacks. He started calling me directly, leaving long, rambling voicemails on my phone. One moment he'd be the concerned father, his voice thick with false emotion, begging me to come home and stop this madness. The next he'd be the raging tyrant, threatening to ruin me. "You have no idea who you're dealing with, Ethan," he snarled in one message. "I built this city. I have judges in my pocket." "I have judges in my pocket? You think some little downtown lawyer can touch me? I will bury you. I will erase you just like I should have done years ago." He didn't know I was recording every single call. Each threat, each admission, was another brick in the wall of evidence we were building. He turned our extended family against me. Aunts, uncles, cousins, people I hadn't heard from in years started calling, reciting the same script my mother had. I was ungrateful, mentally unstable, trying to destroy the man who gave me everything. The boundary formation that had started with data was now being stress-tested with emotional warfare. It was hard. These were voices from my childhood, and a part of me still craved their acceptance. But I held firm. I would give them a polite, firm, "I'm sorry you feel that way, but you don't have all the information," and I would end the call. The most difficult part was the silence from my mother's side of the family. They were quiet, unassuming people from a small town in East Texas, and my father had always treated them with disdain, effectively cutting my mother off from them. I didn't know if he had reached them, or if they were just staying out of it. Their silence was a void I couldn't interpret. The pressure was immense. I barely slept. I lost weight. I felt like I was living a double life. By day I was a terrified young man, seemingly cracking under the pressure. By night, I was a forensic investigator, methodically piecing together the evidence that would bring down an empire. The cognitive dissonance was a constant hum beneath the surface of my life. I had to hold two opposing ideas in my head at all times. I am weak and I am strong. The turning point came when Jessica's PI got a hit on Azure Sky Properties. The LLC used to pay off the former assistant. The P.O. box was still active, and it was registered not to the assistant, but to a man named Marcus Thorne, my father's notoriously ruthless head of security, his personal fixer. "This is it," Jessica said, her eyes gleaming. "This connects the bribe directly to your father's inner circle. The money went from your account to a company controlled by his right-hand man, who then paid off the employee. It's a clean chain of conspiracy." I now had the full picture. A massive Ponzi scheme where funds from new investors were used to pay off old ones, with millions siphoned off into offshore accounts. We had evidence of bribery, insider trading, and witness intimidation. And we had proof that my father had used my name and my bank account to facilitate at least one of these crimes, proving his intent to frame me. My mother's secret ledger was the roadmap, and the $50,000 transfer was the smoking gun. "It's time," Jessica said one evening, closing a thick binder filled with our compiled evidence. "Ready. The U.S. Attorney's Office has been pressuring me for a deposition. They still think you're a suspect. We're going to give them a deposition they'll never forget." She explained the strategy. We wouldn't go to the feds beforehand and lay out our case. That would give my father time to react, to hide assets, to destroy evidence. Instead, we would walk into the deposition, with my father and his team of high-priced lawyers present, and we would detonate the bomb in the middle of the room. We would use the government's own investigation as the stage for our revelation. It was audacious, it was risky, it was perfect. The day of the deposition was gray and overcast, the Austin sky the color of wet concrete. I felt strangely calm as I put on the suit Jessica had told me to buy. It wasn't a power suit, it was a suit that made me look young, overwhelmed, and slightly ill-fitting. The perfect costume for the role I was about to play. The law office where the deposition was held was a neutral ground, a temple of corporate law with beige walls and forgettable art. My father was already there, flanked by 3 lawyers who looked like they were carved from granite. He looked magnificent, tanned, confident, his silver hair perfectly coiffed. He radiated power. When he saw me, his expression shifted to one of pained disappointment, a look he had perfected over decades. "Ethan," he said, his voice loud enough for the government lawyers to hear. "Son, you're not too late to stop this. We can still handle this as a family." I didn't answer. I just looked at him, letting my fear show, and sat down next to Jessica. The lead prosecutor, a man named Davison, began the questioning. His tone was sharp, skeptical. He walked me through the formation of the shell companies. "I'm Mr. Sal, Mr. Masier Naayui. Hayes, you were 18 years old, but you expect this panel to believe you had no idea what you were signing when you became a principal officer of a multi-million-dollar corporation?" "That's correct," I said, my voice quiet. My father told me it was a trust, a formality. I trusted him. My father sighed dramatically from across the table. His lawyers scribbled on their legal pads. For 2 hours, Davison grilled me. He showed me documents with my signature, wire transfers from the corporate accounts. With every question, he painted a picture of me as a complicit, greedy young man. I stuck to my story, playing the part of the naive, manipulated son. I could feel my father's smug satisfaction radiating across the room. He thought he was winning. He thought I was pathetic. Finally, Jessica leaned forward. "My client has been answering your questions patiently. Now, we'd like to provide some context. We have some information that we believe is directly relevant to your investigation into Hayes' development." My father's lead lawyer stood up. "Objection. This is a deposition of Mr. Ethan Hayes, not a forum for his counsel to present theories." "It's not a theory," Jessica said coolly. "It's evidence. And since your client, Mr. Richard Hayes, is present, I'm sure he'll be happy to clarify any points." Davison, smelling blood in the water, waved the lawyer down. "I'll allow it. Proceed, Ms. Martinez." This was it. Showtime. Jessica placed a binder on the table. "Let's start with a company called Azure Sky Properties," she began. She laid out the $50,000 transfer from my account, the purchase of the SUV for the former assistant, and the fact that the company was controlled by my father's head of security. Across the table, the first crack appeared in my father's composure. A muscle in his jaw twitched. His lawyers started whispering furiously. Then Jessica moved to the main event. "My client's mother, Sarah Hayes, passed away 2 years ago," she said, her voice softening slightly. "She was a meticulous woman. She kept detailed records. We've discovered what amounts to a secret ledger, documenting what she believed to be illicit activities connected to Hayes' development, hidden within her personal files." She projected an image of one of the photo album pages onto the screen in the conference room, with the hidden metadata comment displayed beside it. "Acheron Eachway Bluebonnet Savings and Loan." "We believe Acheron refers to Bluebonnet Savings and Loan, and HCDG 881 is an account number," Jessica explained. "We believe that on April 11, 28, days before the bank's collapse, Richard Hayes moved millions of dollars out of this account, contrary to what he told the press and federal regulators." My father shot to his feet. "This is insane. Slander. My wife was a sick woman. She was delusional for years. Is that what you told her, Richard? I asked, my voice suddenly clear and strong. It was the first time I had spoken out of turn. The entire room went silent and looked at me. I was no longer playing the part of the victim. I was looking directly at my father. Is that what you told her when she asked about Jericho Consulting, or the Canary Project, or the dozen other names on her list? His face went from tan to pale in a matter of seconds. He stared at me, his mouth slightly agape. He was seeing me for the first time, not the boy, but the man holding the weapon his wife had built. Jessica delivered the final blow. And we also have this, she said, and she played the audio from her laptop. It was the voicemail he had left me. His voice, filled with narcissistic rage, echoed through the silent room. I will erase you just like I should have done years ago. The prosecutor, Davison, stared at my father, his expression one of dawning comprehension. He wasn't looking at a concerned father and his rogue son anymore. He was looking at a prime suspect and his star witness. My father crumpled back into his chair. The mask was gone, the charm, the power, the arrogance. It all evaporated, leaving behind a hollow, terrified old man. He looked at me, his eyes wide with betrayal, but also with a flicker of something else. Fear. He finally understood. I hadn't just brought evidence. I had brought our family's ghosts into the room, and they were all pointing at him. The deposition ended abruptly. Jessica and I walked out into the gray afternoon, leaving a scene of chaos behind us. Federal agents were already conferring with Davison. My father and his team were sequestered in the conference room. It was over. You did it, Ethan, Jessica said, putting a hand on my shoulder. I just nodded, feeling a strange emptiness. The rage was gone, replaced by a deep, profound exhaustion. The fallout was swift and spectacular. Richard Hayes was arrested the next day. The story was front-page news. Real estate tycoon arrested in massive fraud scheme. And his face was plastered everywhere, but this time, it wasn't the smiling, confident man from the billboards. It was a mugshot. Gaunt, gray, and defeated. The details of my mother's ledger, though not all made public, were the core of the government's case. I was granted full immunity in exchange for my testimony. The family members who had called to chastise me fell silent. Some even tried to call back, offering pathetic, fumbling apologies. I didn't answer. The most surprising call came from my mother's sister, my Aunt Carol. I hadn't spoken to her in a decade. Her voice was thick with tears. Ethan, we saw the news, she said. We had no idea. Your father, and your father. He always told us Sarah was unwell, that she was unstable. He kept her from us. We should have tried harder. We failed her, and we failed you. She didn't know, I said, and for the first time I meant it. And he was a professional liar. We talked for an hour. She told me stories about my mother as a young woman, vibrant, funny, and strong, before my father had hollowed her out. It was like getting a piece of my mother back that I never knew I had lost. In the end, my father took a plea bargain to avoid a lengthy, embarrassing trial. He was sentenced to 20 years in a federal prison. His empire was dismantled, his assets seized to pay back the investors he'd defrauded. His name was stripped from the hospital wings and charity plaques. He was, as he had threatened to do to me, erased. I never saw him again. I had no desire to. My revenge wasn't about watching him suffer. It was about reclaiming the truth. It was about giving my mother the justice she never got in life. With a portion of the money from a victim restitution fund, I started a small foundation in my mother's name, the Sarah Hayes Project. It provides free financial literacy and legal resources to victims of economic and domestic abuse, helping people untangle themselves from the kind of coercive control that defined my mother's life. My life is quiet again, but it's a different kind of quiet now. It's not the fragile, anxious quiet of before. It's a deep, solid, and peaceful quiet built on a foundation of truth. I still live in Austin. Sometimes, when I drive down the highway, I see the empty spaces where my father's billboards used to be. They're just blank canvases against the wide Texas sky, waiting for a new story. I often think about my mother's photo albums. She was documenting a life of lies, but in her own secret way, she was also planting a garden. She was planting seeds of truth in the darkest, most hidden places, hoping that one day, something would grow. It took years, but it finally did. And I'd like to think wherever she is, she can see the bloom.